You are not required to marry me." Rosalind Whitmore's voice trembled despite her effort to sound composed. Rain battered the narrow window behind her, rattling the glass like impatient fingers. "I release you from my brother's dying request." Across the small boarding room, the Duke of Ashworth did not move. Water dripped steadily from the hem of his dark greatcoat onto the warped wooden floor. He had clearly walked through the storm instead of waiting for a carriage. The rain had soaked his hair and darkened the severe lines of his coat, but nothing in his expression softened. "Burden," he repeated slowly. The word left his mouth with dangerous calm. Rosalind forced herself to meet his gaze. She had never been so aware of the misery of her surroundings. The candle burned low in its tin holder. The room smelled faintly of damp plaster and cold ashes. The hearth behind him held nothing but gray dust. "You think I came here out of obligation?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but something in it made her stomach tighten. "I believe," Rosalind said carefully, "that my brother loved me very much, and dying men often ask for promises they do not fully consider." For a moment the Duke simply looked at her. He was taller than any man she had ever stood near, broad-shouldered, severe, every line of his face carved as if from stone. The candlelight flickered across the hard angle of his jaw and the faint silver scar near his temple. Her brother had described him in countless letters. Cold as winter, unyielding, a man soldiers followed without question. But Thomas had also called him honorable. Rosalind prayed that part was true. "My brother asked you to marry me," she continued quietly. "But I will not bind a stranger to a dying wish." The Duke stepped further into the room. The cramped space seemed to shrink around him. "I am 26, she added, lifting her chin. "Plain, without dowry, without connections. I cannot allow you to sacrifice your future because a dying man loved his sister too much." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he moved. Without warning, the Duke crossed the room and crouched before the empty hearth. Rosalind blinked in confusion. From his coat pocket he produced tinder and a small flint. Within minutes, flames crackled to life. Warmth spilled slowly into the frozen room. Rosalind had not felt real heat in days. Despite herself, her fingers drifted toward the fire. Behind her, the storm roared across the rooftops of Cheapside. "You are shivering," he said. "I am quite comfortable, Your Grace." The lie hung embarrassingly between them. The Duke did not argue. He simply stood. The firelight rose behind him, outlining the tall, immovable shape of his body. "Thomas spoke of you constantly," he said. The mention of her brother tightened her throat instantly. Rosalind pressed her hands together. "He called you Rosie," the Duke continued. "His brilliant Rosie, the only person in England worth fighting for." Her breath faltered. "He saved my life," the Duke added. The words came with the quiet certainty of memory. "At the Khyber Pass, I was shot through the shoulder, could not hold a rifle, could not ride." He looked at her directly now. "Your brother carried me 2 miles through enemy fire." The fire crackled softly behind him. "He was shot twice while doing it," the Duke finished. Rosalind swallowed the sudden ache rising in her chest. "Thomas never mentioned that," she whispered. "He would not." Silence settled again. Then the Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter. "This is for you." Rosalind recognized the handwriting instantly. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "Trust him, Rosie. He has waited for you longer than you know." Her heart stuttered. She looked up slowly. "Waited for me?" For the first time since entering the room, something in the Duke's expression shifted. Not warmth, something far more dangerous. "Yes." He took a step closer. "I saw your portrait 7 years ago." Rosalind blinked. "My brother carried it with him?" "In his breast pocket." The Duke's voice lowered. "I asked who you were." "And he told you?" "He told me," the Duke said quietly, "about the sister who had been treated like a servant in her own home." Rosalind felt heat rush to her cheeks. "He told me," the Duke continued, "about the woman who deserved the world and had been given nothing." His gray eyes did not leave her face, and then I looked at the portrait. Rosalind could not breathe. "And I realized something very inconvenient." He stepped closer still. "That the woman in that miniature was the most extraordinary creature I had ever seen." The room seemed suddenly too small, too warm, too full of him. "Your Grace." "Marcus," he interrupted. She froze. "My name," he said softly, "is Marcus." His voice roughened. "And when your brother asked me on his deathbed to marry you..." Rosalind's pulse thundered. I said yes. She shook her head slowly. "That is impossible." He moved even closer. You think I agreed out of debt? Why else? Because, he said quietly, I have spent 7 years wondering what your voice would sound like. Rosalind's breath caught. And now that I have heard it, his hands curled slowly at his sides. I find I cannot imagine leaving this room without you. The rain hammered the window again. Rosalind's world tilted. You cannot mean to marry me, she whispered. The Duke of Ashworth held her gaze. Then, to her absolute shock, he dropped to his knees. For several long seconds, Rosalind Whitmore could not move. A duke, one of the most powerful men in England, knelt before her on the rough floorboards of a rented room that smelled faintly of damp and candle smoke. The fire crackled behind him. Rain lashed the window, and the Duke of Ashworth remained perfectly still. Marry me, he said. The words were spoken without flourish, without poetry. Yet the quiet certainty in them made Rosalind's heart pound violently against her ribs. This cannot be real, she whispered. Marcus Ashworth lifted his eyes to her face. Up close she saw what the dim candlelight had hidden before. The exhaustion in his expression. The faint shadows beneath his eyes. The deep lines carved into a face far too young to carry such severity. I assure you, he said calmly, nothing in my life has ever been more real. She shook her head. You do not know me. I know enough. You know a portrait. I know a woman who has survived 26 years of neglect with more dignity than most ladies display with a fortune. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly, and that is enough for me to begin. Rosalind clasped her hands tightly together. You are offering me a life I cannot accept. Marcus did not stand. Explain. I would forever be a reminder of a promise made beside a dying bed. I have carried that promise willingly, but you would regret it. The faintest shadow of amusement crossed his mouth. I regret many things in my life, Miss Whitmore. This will not be among them. You cannot know that. I can. His voice lowered. Because I agreed before Thomas asked. Her breath caught. I agreed the moment I saw your face 7 years ago. Silence swallowed the room. Rosalind stared at him as if he had spoken madness. You have imagined me, she said quietly. Invented someone who does not exist. Marcus finally rose to his feet. The motion was fluid, controlled, like a soldier rising from the ground after battle. I imagined a woman who was kind, he said. He stepped closer. I imagined someone brave. Another step. Part 3. Someone capable of loyalty. He stopped before her. Now I meet a woman who would rather freeze in poverty than accept help she believes she has not earned. His gray eyes searched hers, and I find the reality considerably more compelling than the fantasy. Rosalind felt heat rise beneath her skin. You are speaking recklessly. I rarely do. You have known me less than half an hour. Marcus tilted his head slightly. You have known me just as long, he replied. That is not the same. No. His gaze darkened. You have far less to lose. She hesitated. That unfortunately was true. 3 days. In 3 days she would be forced from this room. 3 days before hunger and desperation decided the rest of her life. Marcus watched the realization cross her face. I am not asking for love, he said quietly. Her eyes flickered toward him again. I am asking for time. Time? A year. She frowned slightly. A year in my household as my wife. The word echoed strangely in the small room. If after that time, he continued, you find that my presence offends you, you may leave with a settlement large enough to live however you choose. Rosalind blinked. You would grant me freedom? Yes. And your reputation? He gave a faint shrug. My reputation is already considered alarming. She almost smiled. Almost. You are serious. I always am. She studied him carefully. You would share a home with a woman who might never love you? Marcus held her gaze steadily. I have waited 7 years to meet you. His voice softened. I believe I can endure 12 months. The sincerity in his words unsettled her far more than arrogance would have. Rosalind turned toward the fire, staring into the flames. Her entire life had been shaped by caution, by humility, by the quiet understanding that she was unwanted. Yet here stood a man offering her a future she had never dared imagine. You are very certain of yourself, she said slowly. I am certain of you. You barely know me. I know your brother trusted you with his final breath. Marcus stepped closer again, and I know that when you told me I was free to leave, you meant it. His voice dropped lower, which tells me more about your character than any season in London ever could. The fire popped loudly behind them. Rosalind exhaled slowly. Then she turned back to him. If I accept, she said carefully, I will not be a silent ornament in your house. His brow lifted. I intend to manage your estates, learn the accounts, understand the tenants. The corner of Marcus's mouth moved. Excellent. You are not offended? I am relieved. Relieved? Yes. He folded his arms loosely. I have no interest in marrying a decorative fool. Rosalind stared at him. You are an extraordinary man, Your Grace. His expression sharpened. Marcus. She hesitated. Then quietly. Marcus. Something flickered in his eyes. Good, he murmured. The storm outside began to ease. Rosalind drew a slow breath. Then she said the words that would change everything. Yes. Marcus froze. The silence between them stretched dangerously thin. You will marry me? Yes. For the first time since entering the room, the Duke of Ashworth looked genuinely shaken. He reached for her slowly as though afraid she might disappear. Rosalind, but before he could say more, a sudden knock struck the door. Sharp, urgent. Both of them turned. Neither yet understood that the news waiting outside would change the terms of their marriage before it had even begun. The knock came again. Harder this time. Marcus's hand stilled around Rosalind's wrist. Neither of them spoke. The storm outside had softened into a steady rain, but the sudden intrusion shattered the fragile stillness that had settled between them after her answer. Marcus released her slowly. Stay here, he said. The command was instinctive, quiet, and absolute. Rosalind folded her hands together as he crossed the room and opened the narrow door. A boy stood in the dim hallway, soaked through and breathing hard. He could not have been more than 14. Your Grace? The boy stammered. Marcus's expression sharpened instantly. What is it? A letter, sir, urgent. The boy extended a damp envelope. Marcus took it. The seal had already broken from the rain. For a moment he simply stared at the handwriting. Something changed in his face. Not fear, but a sudden tightening. Who delivered this? He asked. Messenger from Derbyshire, sir. Marcus dismissed the boy with a coin and closed the door. Rosalind watched him carefully. You look troubled. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he unfolded the letter. His eyes moved quickly across the page. Then he exhaled. Not relief. Something heavier. What has happened? Rosalind asked quietly. Marcus lowered the paper. My steward writes from Ashworth Hall. The estate? Yes. He folded the letter again with deliberate care. There has been discussion. About what? You. Rosalind felt a familiar chill creep across her spine. Ah, she said softly. Marcus watched her. You expected this? Of course. She moved closer to the fire. When a duke marries a penniless spinster from Cheapside, people will have opinions. Marcus's jaw tightened. They will have silence. You cannot silence half of England. I can try. Rosalind almost smiled, Part 4. But the letter still rested in his hand. What exactly does your steward say? Marcus hesitated. He reports that certain members of my extended family have already begun making inquiries. Inquiries? They wish to know whether the rumor is true. Rosalind lifted her chin. And if it is? They believe I am acting out of grief. Because of my brother. Yes. And they think you will reconsider. Marcus's expression hardened into something cold. They are mistaken. The certainty in his voice warmed her unexpectedly. Still, there will be scandal, she said quietly. Marcus stepped closer. I am a duke. Yes. I do not require society's approval. Perhaps not, Rosalind replied gently. But your future Duchess might. Something flickered across his face. You fear humiliation? I am accustomed to humiliation. Her voice was calm. I simply prefer not to bring it into your house. Marcus stared at her as though the idea offended him. You will not be humiliated. You cannot guarantee that. Yes, he said softly. I can. Rosalind looked at him. Marcus Ashworth had the unsettling presence of a man who believed completely in his own power, not arrogance, certainty. You are very confident. I am very patient. He set the letter aside. The wedding will take place quietly. How quietly? A special license. Her eyes widened slightly. That requires the Archbishop's approval. Marcus's expression did not change. It will be arranged. Rosalind studied him again. You move very quickly. I waited 7 years. That answer silenced her. The firelight moved across his face. For the first time since the proposal, Marcus seemed uncertain. Do you regret saying yes? No. The answer came immediately. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Good. Rosalind glanced toward the window. The rain had slowed. London's gas lamps flickered faintly through the wet glass. I must pack, she said. Marcus frowned. Pack? I was told this morning that I must vacate this room in 3 days. Marcus went completely still. 3 days? Yes. She said it simply. I have already sold my shoes to pay for another week's rent. The silence that followed was dangerous. Rosalind watched something dark ignite behind his gray eyes. You sold your shoes. It seemed practical. Marcus crossed the room in 2 strides. Before she could react, he knelt. Not ceremoniously this time, simply dropped to one knee. Then he lifted the hem of her worn skirt just enough to see her bare feet against the cold boards. His jaw tightened. Christ. Your Grace. Marcus. His voice was low, rougher now. You have been walking the streets of London barefoot. It is hardly unusual for a woman in my circumstances. Marcus rose slowly. Every line of his body had hardened. That ends tonight. I do not expect... Oh, you will never again sell anything simply to survive. His voice had become dangerously quiet. Rosalind had the sudden feeling that he was speaking less to her than to the entire world that had failed her. I will not permit it. She swallowed. You cannot rewrite the past. No. Marcus looked down at her with a strange intensity. But I can control the future. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then unexpectedly Rosalind laughed softly. Marcus blinked. You find this amusing? No. Her eyes shone faintly. I find you astonishing. His expression shifted. Something warmer. You will become accustomed to me. I doubt that very much. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, I hope you never do. And for the first time since he entered the room, Rosalind felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath her fear. Not security, something far more dangerous. Hope. But neither of them yet understood that the greatest test of that hope had already begun. 3 weeks later, the bells of Ashworth Hall rang across the Derbyshire hills. Rosalind Whitmore stood in the ancient chapel beside the man who had changed the course of her life with a single knock on a door. The chapel was centuries old. Stone walls climbed toward a vaulted ceiling darkened by time. Beeswax candles flickered along the aisle, their soft glow reflecting in the polished marble tombs of Ashworth ancestors who had ruled this land long before Rosalind had been born. The scent of white roses filled the air. Marcus had ordered them cut that morning from the winter gardens. She stood beside him in ivory silk. The gown had been made in Bond Street only days earlier, its fabric smooth and luminous beneath the candlelight. A delicate veil rested against her shoulders, and sapphires, Ashworth family jewels, glimmered softly at her throat. She hardly recognized herself, but Marcus had not taken his eyes off her since she entered the chapel. Not once. The vicar cleared his throat gently. Your Grace? Marcus seemed to return from some distant thought. Yes. Rosalind felt the warmth of his gaze as the ceremony began. The words of the marriage service echoed through the quiet chapel. Duty, honor, fidelity. Promises spoken by countless couples before them. Yet when Marcus repeated the vows, his voice carried something deeper than ceremony. Resolvi. With this ring, he said quietly, sliding the gold band onto her finger. I thee wed. Rosalind's hand trembled. The ring felt warm. Real. The vicar finished the final blessing. You may kiss your wife, Your Grace. Marcus hesitated. Only a heartbeat. Then he lifted her veil. His hand was steady as he touched her cheek. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held something that made her breath catch. Not triumph, relief. He kissed her gently, soft, almost reverent. When he stepped back, the small gathering of witnesses applauded politely. The Countess of Petton smiled approvingly. Marcus's steward bowed his head. The marriage was complete. Rosalind Whitmore was now the Duchess of Ashworth. Yet the true weight of that transformation did not settle until later that evening. The wedding guests had departed. Ashworth Hall had grown quiet. Fires burned in every hearth, casting warm light across the enormous drawing room where Rosalind now stood beside the tall windows. Snow had begun to fall across the estate gardens. Behind her, Marcus poured 2 glasses of brandy. You should sit, he said. I am perfectly well. You have endured a wedding, an entire household of curious servants, and 3 hours of introductions to relatives who pretend to be pleased. His voice softened. You may sit. She allowed herself a small smile. Very well. Rosalind lowered herself onto the sofa. Marcus handed her the brandy. Their fingers brushed. A brief contact, yet the warmth lingered longer than it should have. For several moments neither spoke. Then Marcus cleared his throat slightly. There is something you should understand. Rosalind looked at him. About marriage. His expression had grown serious again. In English law, he continued quietly, a wife's property becomes her husband's. She nodded. I know. Any income you earn is legally mine. I know that as well. Marcus studied her face. And yet you still married me? Rosalind held his gaze. You offered me freedom after a year. Yes. And I believed you meant it. Marcus looked almost startled. I do. She nodded once. Then I trust you. Something moved behind his eyes. Something complicated. But before he could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Marcus frowned. At this hour? The housekeeper entered with a letter on a silver tray. For the Duchess. Rosalind froze. The Duchess? Mrs. Oldworth smiled kindly. Yes, Your Grace. Rosalind accepted the envelope slowly. The seal broke easily beneath her fingers. She unfolded the letter, and the color drained instantly from her face. Marcus stepped forward. What is it? She handed him the page. He read it once, then again. When he finally looked up, his expression had turned to ice. It appears, he said softly, your stepmother has heard about our marriage. Rosalind closed her eyes briefly. And? Marcus handed the letter back. She is coming to Ashworth Hall. Rosalind read the final line again. Her stepmother's elegant handwriting seemed to mock her. I will be bringing Sophia with me, of course. Marcus watched her carefully. You are very calm. I expected this. Yes. His jaw tightened. But I did not. Rosalind looked up slowly. What do you mean? Part 5. Marcus's voice became dangerously quiet. It means, he said, that Lady Whitmore has decided to insult my wife in my own house. The air in the room seemed to shift. Rosalind suddenly remembered every cruel word her stepmother had ever spoken, every humiliation, every dismissal. And now that same woman was arriving at Ashworth Hall, Marcus's home. Marcus stepped closer. You need not worry. She lifted her chin. I am not worried. His brow lifted slightly. No? Rosalind folded the letter neatly. Marcus, she said calmly. If my stepmother wishes to see what became of the girl she discarded, her eyes gleamed faintly, then I believe we should welcome her. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled, and the expression was not gentle. Very well, Duchess. Lady Whitmore arrived at Ashworth Hall 3 days later. The carriage rolled up the sweeping gravel drive shortly before noon, its polished wheels cutting through the thin frost that coated the estate grounds. 2 liveried footmen opened the door as if receiving royalty. But Rosalind stood at the top of the great marble staircase and watched with calm, unblinking composure. Marcus stood beside her. He had insisted. You will not greet her alone, he said quietly. I have greeted her alone my entire life. That ends today. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a gesture subtle enough for propriety, but firm enough to remind anyone watching exactly where she stood now. The front doors opened. Lady Whitmore swept inside as if she owned the house. She wore lavender silk trimmed with fox fur, her posture elegant, her expression carefully pleasant. Beside her stood Sophia, tall, golden-haired, breathtakingly beautiful. The contrast between the sisters could not have been more striking. Rosalind felt the familiar flicker of old insecurity rise in her chest. Sophia had always been the daughter displayed to the world. Rosalind had been the one kept quietly in the shadows. But that life was over. Lady Whitmore stopped at the foot of the staircase. For a moment she simply stared. Rosalind descended slowly. The sapphire necklace at her throat caught the light with every step. By the time she reached the final stair, the transformation was impossible to ignore. She was no longer the girl her stepmother had dismissed. She was the Duchess of Ashworth. Lady Whitmore recovered quickly. My dear Rosalind, she said with syrupy sweetness. How extraordinary. Rosalind inclined her head. Lady Whitmore. Sophia curtsied respectfully. Your Grace. Marcus watched the exchange with the calm patience of a general observing enemy movements across a battlefield. Lady Whitmore's gaze shifted toward him. Your Grace, I cannot express how shocked we were to hear the news. Marcus's expression remained polite. I can imagine. It must have been terribly sudden. It was. Lady Whitmore folded her hands delicately. Which is precisely why I wished to visit. Rosalind already knew what was coming. Her stepmother's voice softened further. You see, I feared this marriage may have been impulsive. Marcus's eyes hardened slightly. Impulsive? Yes, Lady Whitmore continued smoothly. My late stepson was clearly very dear to you. Grief can influence even the wisest decisions. The insult hung politely in the air. Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward Rosalind. Duchess, he said quietly. Would you prefer to continue this conversation privately? Rosalind met his gaze. No. She looked back at her stepmother. I believe the entire house may listen if they wish. Lady Whitmore blinked. Rosalind, you misunderstand me. I merely wish to ensure that the Duke fully understands the circumstances of your upbringing. Marcus's voice became almost conversational. I assure you I understand them very well. Lady Whitmore's smile tightened. I only mean that Sophia, for example, has had the benefit of a proper London season, a refined education, and considerable social preparation. Sophia flushed faintly beside her. Mother. Hush, darling. Lady Whitmore continued. A duke's household can be very demanding. Marcus took one slow step forward. Indeed. Lady Whitmore brightened slightly, mistaking his tone. And of course, if your grace ever felt that the match was unsuitable. Unsuitable. Marcus repeated the word softly. Rosalind felt the subtle shift in the air, the dangerous calm she had begun to recognize. Lady Whitmore continued boldly. There are always ways to correct unfortunate decisions before they become permanent. Marcus smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Lady Whitmore, he said quietly, are you suggesting I should replace my wife? The room went perfectly still. Sophia's eyes widened in horror. My mother did not mean... I mean only, Lady Whitmore rushed on, that Sophia is widely admired in society and... Marcus's voice cut across hers. Cold, controlled, deadly. My wife, he said slowly, is the Duchess of Ashworth. Every word landed like a hammer. She will remain the Duchess of Ashworth. Lady Whitmore opened her mouth again. Marcus did not allow her to continue. And if anyone, he added softly, ever suggests otherwise in my presence again, his gray eyes turned to steel. They will regret it. The silence that followed was absolute. But Rosalind suddenly realized something far more unsettling. Marcus's anger was not fading. It was growing, and she was not entirely certain she could control what he might do next. The silence in the entrance hall stretched unbearably. Lady Whitmore's carefully practiced smile faltered. Sophia looked mortified, but Marcus Ashworth did not move. His hand remained steady at Rosalind's back, the warmth of his palm radiating through the silk of her gown like a quiet promise, or perhaps a warning. Lady Whitmore attempted a brittle laugh. My goodness, Your Grace, there is no need for such severity. I merely meant... You meant, Marcus said softly, to humiliate my wife in her own home. The calmness in his voice made the accusation far more terrifying than anger would have. I would never... You did. Rosalind felt the tension in the room rising dangerously. Marcus, she said quietly. He did not take his eyes off Lady Whitmore. Yes? Perhaps we should continue this conversation in the drawing room. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but after a moment he inclined his head. Of course. The servants moved silently as the small party relocated. Within minutes they sat around the great marble fireplace of Ashworth Hall's drawing room. Tea appeared. No one touched it. Lady Whitmore composed herself again. Your Grace, I fear there has been a misunderstanding. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Explain it. My concern is only for your reputation. Rosalind nearly smiled. Marcus did not. My reputation, he said slowly, survived the Afghan campaigns. His gray eyes hardened. I suspect it will survive my marriage. Lady Whitmore's fingers tightened around her teacup. You must admit the circumstances are unusual. They are. A duke marrying a woman who has never even attended a proper London season. Marcus turned his head slightly. His gaze settled on Rosalind. Does that trouble you? No, Rosalind replied calmly. It does not trouble me either. Marcus looked back at Lady Whitmore. There, the matter appears settled. Lady Whitmore's patience snapped. Your Grace, you cannot seriously expect society to accept this without question. Marcus's expression shifted. For the first time, the cold aristocratic mask slipped slightly. Lady Whitmore, he said quietly. Society does not question me. The words landed like a verdict. Sophia lowered her eyes. Rosalind studied her stepmother carefully. For years, this woman had controlled every corner of her life, every decision, every humiliation. But here, inside Ashworth Hall, everything had changed. Still, she did not want vengeance, only closure. Lady Whitmore, Rosalind said calmly. Her stepmother turned. Yes?
I believe there is something you should know.
Marcus glanced at her with curiosity. Rosalind folded her hands in her lap. My husband's solicitor recently reviewed several financial documents belonging to my late father's estate. Lady Whitmore went very still. Sophia looked confused. Rosalind, what are you talking about? Marcus spoke softly. £700. The teacup slipped from Lady Whitmore's fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The room fell silent. Rosalind's voice remained calm. My mother left that sum in a legal trust for my future. Sophia's eyes widened. Mother? Lady Whitmore's face had turned pale. Marcus reached for a small folder resting on the table beside him. My solicitor also discovered several forged signatures. He placed the documents gently on the table. Curious, is it not? Lady Whitmore stared at the papers as if they were poison. This is absurd. Is it? Marcus's voice remained dangerously quiet. Forgery is a criminal offense. Sophia gasped. Mother, you didn't… Lady Whitmore stood abruptly. You have no proof. Marcus slid another document forward. Witness statements. Her hands trembled. Rosalind watched the woman who had ruled her childhood crumble. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Marcus leaned forward slightly. You have two choices. Lady Whitmore's breathing had grown shallow. What choices? A public prosecution. His gray eyes held no mercy. Or a private resolution. The room seemed to shrink. Sophia whispered. What does that mean? Marcus's voice was calm. It means Lady Whitmore repays every stolen pound. He paused, with interest. Rosalind felt the shift in power settle around her like armor. Lady Whitmore looked up slowly. You would destroy us. Marcus's answer came without hesitation. You destroyed her first. The silence that followed felt like the edge of a blade. But Rosalind suddenly realized something else. Marcus was not finished, not even close, and what he intended to do next might shock all of them. The silence after Marcus's words felt suffocating. Lady Whitmore stood frozen beside the fireplace, her elegant posture collapsing beneath the weight of the truth now laid bare before witnesses. Sophia's face had gone white. You stole from Rosalind? She whispered. Lady Whitmore did not answer. Marcus's gaze remained fixed upon her. 700 pounds, he said quietly, taken over 8 years. His tone was calm, but the quiet fury behind it was unmistakable. That money would have given her independence. Rosalind watched the scene unfold with a strange, distant clarity. For most of her life, she had imagined confronting her stepmother. She had imagined anger, tears, accusations. But now, standing beside the man who had just dismantled Lady Whitmore's lies with surgical precision, she felt none of those things, only relief. Sophia slowly turned toward her. Rosalind, I swear to you I had no idea. I know. The sincerity in Rosalind's voice startled her. Lady Whitmore finally spoke. This is revenge. No, Marcus replied softly. This is accountability. Lady Whitmore's eyes flashed with desperate calculation. You would truly prosecute a widow? Marcus's gaze did not waver. I would prosecute a thief. The air in the drawing room grew dangerously still. Lady Whitmore's shoulders sagged. What do you want? Marcus leaned back slightly. Repayment of the stolen funds. He slid another document across the table, a written confession, and a signed agreement that you will never again interfere in my wife's life. Rosalind noticed the subtle shift. My wife, not Miss Whitmore, not even Duchess, his wife. Lady Whitmore stared at the document. If I refuse? Marcus's voice softened. Then the courts will decide. Sophia sank slowly into a chair. Oh God. Several long seconds passed. Then Lady Whitmore picked up the pen. Her hand trembled as she signed. The scratching sound of ink across paper echoed loudly in the room. When she finished, Marcus folded the document neatly. It will be delivered to my solicitor. Lady Whitmore did not look at Rosalind again. She simply walked toward the door. Sophia hesitated. Then she turned back. I am sorry, she said quietly. Rosalind studied her stepsister. For years, Sophia had been the favored child, the beautiful daughter. Yet now she looked just as wounded by Lady Whitmore's cruelty. You were a child, Rosalind replied gently. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Then she followed her mother out. The door closed, and the house fell silent. For several moments, neither Marcus nor Rosalind spoke. Finally, Marcus exhaled. I apologize if my actions were excessive. Rosalind turned toward him. You destroyed her. I intended to. There was no apology in his voice, only certainty. Rosalind studied him carefully. You would have done it even if I had asked you not to. Yes. His answer was immediate. Why? Marcus looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Because she hurt you. Rosalind felt warmth spread through her chest, not the frightening heat of anger. Something softer. You are terrifying, she said quietly. Marcus almost smiled. I have been told that. She stepped closer. But you are also loyal. His gaze darkened slightly, dangerously so. Rosalind reached up and touched his cheek. The small gesture made him go utterly still. "You do not need to fight every battle for me," she said softly. Marcus's voice lowered. "I know, but I will always stand beside you when they come." Her heart tightened. "And they will come." "Yes." Rosalind smiled faintly. "Then we shall face them together." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not obsession, not the dangerous possessiveness she had glimpsed before. Something steadier, something earned. "Rosalind," he said quietly. "Yes?" He reached for her hand. "I have spent 7 years waiting to meet you." His thumb brushed the ring he had placed there only weeks earlier. "And now that I have you—" His voice softened. "I find I have no intention of ever letting you disappear again." Rosalind's smile deepened. "Then I suppose," she said gently, "we shall both have to learn how to live with that." Marcus pulled her into his arms. Outside, winter sunlight spilled across the grounds of Ashworth Hall. And for the first time in her life, Rosalind Whitmore understood something her brother had always believed. She had never been invisible. She had only been waiting for someone who truly knew how to see her.